My parents looked at me like I was losing my mind when I accused my brother of sabotaging my car. But when Ricardo's auto shop called 3 days later with what they found under my hood, Tyler's cocky smirk vanished faster than his alibis. And suddenly, Mom and Dad realized which one of their children had really been lying all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong the moment my Honda Civic started making that grinding noise on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the family house in Riverside Heights. It wasn't the kind of sound a well-maintained car makes, especially not one I'd just had serviced at Garcia Automotive the week before. The steering felt loose, the brakes were spongy, and there was an odd burning smell coming from under the hood that made my stomach turn. Tyler was washing his truck in the driveway when I pulled up, whistling some country song and acting like he didn't have a care in the world. He'd always been the golden child, star quarterback at Riverside High, full scholarship to State University, now working his way up at Henderson Construction, with Dad's connections paving every step. Meanwhile, I was the disappointment who'd chosen community college and a job at Westfield Animal Clinic instead of following the family blueprint. "Car trouble, sis?" he called out, not even looking up from his spotless Ford F-150. That truck was his pride and joy, detailed every weekend, modifications that cost more than I made in 3 months. "Maybe you should have bought American instead of that foreign junk." I ignored the jab. Tyler had been making comments about my cheap Honda ever since I'd bought it used last year. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been saving every penny from my veterinary assistant job, taking extra shifts, skipping meals, all to build up enough money for veterinary school applications. The car wasn't a status symbol. It was transportation to get me to my real life. "Something's wrong with the steering," I told him, popping the hood. "And the brakes feel weird?" Tyler wandered over, sudsy sponge still in his hand, and peered under the hood with the confidence of someone who'd taken exactly 1 auto shop class in high school. "Looks fine to me. Probably just needs an oil change. When's the last time you had it serviced?" "Last week, at Garcia's." "Well, Miguel Garcia's been known to cut corners. You get what you pay for." Another dig. Tyler always had an opinion about where I spent my money, especially since his truck payments were being temporarily covered by Dad while he got established in his career. That evening at dinner, the grinding noise had gotten worse during my drive to work. I mentioned it to Mom and Dad, thinking they might know a reliable mechanic. Dad barely looked up from his meatloaf. "Cars break down, Harmony," he said in that dismissive tone he'd perfected over the years. "It's probably just normal wear and tear. You can't expect a used car to run like new forever." "But I just had it serviced." "Maybe you should start looking into something more reliable," Mom interrupted, cutting neat slices of green bean casserole. Tyler had been saying you might want to consider trading up to something with better safety ratings. Tyler had been saying, of course he had. He was always full of helpful suggestions about how I could improve my life, usually involving spending money I didn't have on things that would make me more like him. "I can't afford a new car right now. I'm saving for..." "For what?" Dad asked, finally paying attention. "You've been saving for years, but you never seem to have anything to show for it." I bit my tongue. They didn't know about the veterinary school fund because I'd learned not to share my dreams with people who specialized in finding reasons they wouldn't work. Tyler had made sure of that when I was 17 and mentioned wanting to be a vet. He spent 20 minutes explaining why I wasn't smart enough for real medical school and should probably stick to something more realistic, like maybe dog grooming. "I'll figure it out," I said, pushing food around my plate. Tyler leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You know, Harm, if you weren't so stubborn about accepting help, Dad and I could probably get you a deal at Henderson Construction's fleet dealer, employee pricing." There it was, the generous offer that came with strings attached. Tyler loved playing the helpful big brother in front of our parents, knowing I'd never take his charity, and he'd come out looking like the reasonable one. "Thanks, but I'm fine," I said. "Sure you are," he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The next morning, my car wouldn't start at all. The engine would turn over, sputter, then die. The grinding noise had been replaced by complete silence, which somehow felt worse. I was supposed to be at the animal clinic in 30 minutes for the morning surgery rotation. Dr. Patterson was letting me observe a spay procedure, something that would look great on my veterinary school applications. I called Tyler, swallowing my pride because I was desperate. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding annoyed. "What's up? I'm about to head to the Millbrook project site." "My car won't start. Could you maybe give me a ride to work? It's just 15 minutes. "Sorry, sis, going the opposite direction today. Besides, maybe this is the universe telling you it's time for that upgrade we talked about."
The universe, right. I called Mom next, then Dad. Mom was running errands and couldn't be late for her book club. Dad was already at Henderson Construction, couldn't leave the job site. Both suggested I call a rideshare, which would cost me $20 each way, money I couldn't spare. I ended up calling in sick to work, missing the surgery observation, and spending my morning on the phone with Ricardo's auto repair. They could tow the car and take a look, but it would be 3 days before they had an opening. "Probably just a dead battery," Ricardo Martinez told me over the phone. "Or maybe alternator issues. We'll figure it out." 3 days. 3 days of missed work, missed opportunities, missed life. While Tyler drove past in his pristine truck, probably thinking about how he'd been right about foreign cars all along. But what Tyler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ricardo Martinez wasn't just any mechanic. He was the best diagnostic specialist in 3 counties, a guy who'd worked on everything from classic muscle cars to high-end European imports. If there was something wrong with my Honda, Ricardo would find it. And when he did, Tyler's perfect little world was about to come crashing down. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tyler and I hadn't always been enemies. There was a time when he actually looked out for me, back when we were kids, sharing a bunk bed in our old house on Elm Street. He'd let me tag along to baseball practice, help me with math homework, even stood up to Jeremy Caldwell when he pulled my hair on the school bus. But somewhere around middle school, something shifted. Maybe it was when I started getting better grades or when I won the county science fair while he was struggling with basic algebra. The first real crack in our relationship happened when I was 14. Tyler had just gotten his driver's license and was showing off his newfound freedom, picking up friends in Dad's old Chevrolet, acting like he owned the world. I was still riding the bus, still trying to figure out where I fit in the complex social hierarchy of Riverside Heights High School. That's when I found the wounded sparrow in our backyard, wing bent at an unnatural angle, barely breathing. Most kids would have left it alone, or maybe told their parents. But something about that tiny bird sparked something in me. I researched bird anatomy online, fashioned a makeshift splint from popsicle sticks and medical tape, and spent 3 weeks nursing it back to health in a shoebox in my bedroom. When the sparrow finally flew away, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The pure satisfaction of healing something that was broken. I knew right then that I wanted to be a veterinarian. Not a teacher, not a nurse, not any of the appropriate careers Mom kept suggesting. A real doctor. An animal doctor. I made the mistake of sharing my dream at Sunday dinner, practically bouncing in my chair as I described how I saved the bird, how I'd researched veterinary programs at universities across the state. Dad nodded politely, but Tyler laughed. Not the good-natured laugh of a supportive brother, but something sharper. "Veterinarian?" he said, cutting into his roast beef with more force than necessary. "You realize that's basically medical school, right? Like, real medical school, with chemistry and biology and all that advanced stuff." I know, I said, feeling my excitement deflate. I'm good at science. High school science. That's not the same as college-level organic chemistry. Plus, vet school is crazy competitive. Like, valedictorian competitive. No offense, Harmina, but you're more of a B-plus student. I wasn't, actually. I was pulling straight A's. But Tyler hadn't paid attention to my report cards in years. He was too busy basking in the glory of his own achievements. Quarterback stats, college recruiting letters, the constant stream of praise from Dad about his natural leadership abilities. Our grandfather had been a carpenter. Dad worked his way up from crew member to project supervisor at Henderson Construction. Tyler was supposed to be the next generation, the one who'd maybe even start his own company someday. The golden thread connecting past, present, and future. I was just the daughter who worked with animals and drove a used car. But here's what Tyler didn't know. Dr. Patterson wasn't just letting me observe surgeries out of kindness. She was actively preparing me for veterinary school, writing recommendation letters, connecting me with professors at the state veterinary college. She'd even offered to help me apply for specialized scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing veterinary medicine. You have the instincts, she told me just last month after I'd successfully assisted with an emergency surgery on a hit-and-run dog. Not everyone can stay calm under pressure like that. You're going to make an excellent veterinarian, Harmony. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Dr. Patterson didn't know about Tyler's constant undermining, about the way he'd joke at family gatherings about my phase of wanting to be a vet. She didn't know that every time I mentioned an interesting case at dinner, Tyler would change the subject to something about his latest construction project or his truck modifications. The truck. Everything always came back to that damn truck. Tyler had bought it 6 months ago with a signing bonus from Henderson Construction, though everyone knew Dad had pulled strings to get him that position and probably helped with the down payment too. It was a custom Ford F-150 with lifted suspension, premium wheels, and a sound system that could wake the dead. He spent more on detailing products each month than I spent on groceries. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about what the truck represented. Success, stability, the kind of life our parents understood and approved of. When Tyler drove up in that truck, he looked like someone who'd made it. When I drove up in my Honda Civic with its dented bumper and slightly faded paint, I looked like someone still trying. What Tyler couldn't stand, what really ate at him, was that I wasn't trying to compete with him anymore. I'd stopped asking for help, stopped seeking his approval, stopped participating in the family dynamic where he was the star and I was the supporting character. I had my own plans, my own goals, my own quiet confidence that didn't need his validation. And apparently, that was a threat he couldn't tolerate. Looking back now, I can see the pattern forming over the past year. Little comments about my car's reliability, suggestions that I should invest in something safer, jokes about how foreign cars always break down eventually. He'd even started parking his truck in a way that made it harder for me to back out of the driveway, claiming he needed better access to his tools. Tools that somehow kept ending up scattered around my car after family gatherings. I should have paid attention to those warning signs. Should have noticed how Tyler's helpful suggestions always seemed to involve spending money I didn't have or making changes that would derail my careful plans. Should have realized that his sudden interest in my transportation situation wasn't brotherly concern. But I was focused on my future, on the life I was building one saved dollar and one assisted surgery at a time. I thought Tyler's petty jealousy was just that. Petty, harmless, something I could ignore until I was successful enough that his opinion didn't matter. I never imagined he'd actually try to sabotage me. The tow truck arrived at 7 a.m, rumbling down Maple Street like some mechanical vulture come to claim its prey. I watched from the living room window as the driver hooked up my Honda, feeling a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with missing work. Something about this whole situation felt wrong.
but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Tyler was conveniently absent when the tow truck showed up, already gone to his Millbrook construction site. But I noticed his truck had been moved overnight. It was now parked in a different spot in the driveway, closer to where my car had been sitting. When I mentioned it to Mom over coffee, she just shrugged. He probably needed to get his tools out of the truck bed. You know how early those construction crews start. But Tyler's tools were kept in the garage, not in his truck. I'd seen him reorganizing them just last weekend, complaining about how Dad's old workbench was too cluttered and he needed better storage solutions. It was another one of those details that didn't quite add up, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't want to fit together. Ricardo called around noon, with an initial assessment. "It's not the battery," he said, his heavily accented voice crackling through my phone. "Battery's fine, alternator's good too. But there's definitely something weird going on with your engine. I'm going to need to take a deeper look under the hood." "Weird how?" I asked. "Hard to explain over the phone. Give me another day or two to really dig into it. I've been working on cars for 25 years, and this one's got me scratching my head." That evening, at dinner, I shared Ricardo's findings with the family. Dad was cutting into his pork chops with surgical precision, the way he approached everything in life. Methodical, controlled, efficient. "Probably just trying to drum up more business," he said without looking up. "These independent mechanics, they always find something mysterious that requires expensive repairs. You should take it to the dealership for a real diagnostic." Ricardo has great reviews online, and Dr. Patterson recommended him. He's worked on her cars for years. Tyler looked up from his mashed potatoes, fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "Dr. Patterson, the vet you work for? Harmony, just because someone's good with animals doesn't mean they know anything about cars." "That's not... She didn't recommend him because of animals. She recommended him because he's honest and skilled."
"Skilled enough to keep you coming back for more repairs," Tyler said with a laugh. "Look, I get it. You want to support the little guy, shop local, all that feel-good stuff. But sometimes you need to be practical. Dad's right about the dealership." Mom nodded approvingly. It would be nice to have a professional opinion from people who actually know Honda vehicles. The conversation was sliding away from me, the way family discussions always did when I disagreed with the consensus. Tyler had a gift for making my concerns sound naive, my choices questionable. It was like watching a masterclass in subtle manipulation, and I was the only one who seemed to notice it happening. "Ricardo is a professional," I said, hearing the defensive edge creeping into my voice. "Just because he doesn't work for a dealership doesn't mean nobody's questioning his professionalism," Dad interrupted. "We're just saying maybe you should get a second opinion before you start throwing money at expensive repairs." The irony wasn't lost on me. These were the same people who never questioned Tyler when he spent $300 on a new exhaust system for his truck, or when he decided he needed premium racing tires that cost more than my monthly rent. But suddenly, they were concerned about me wasting money on car repairs. "Besides," Tyler added, stabbing a piece of broccoli with unnecessary force, "how well do you really know this Ricardo guy? I mean, you're a young woman with a broken-down car. Some mechanics see that as an easy target." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, ugly and persistent. Tyler wasn't just questioning Ricardo's competence, he was implying something darker, something about predatory mechanics taking advantage of helpless women. It was a classic Tyler move. Plant a seed of doubt disguised as protective concern. "That's ridiculous," I snapped. "Ricardo's been in business for decades. He has a family, grandchildren. Dr. Patterson has been taking her cars there for 8 years. "I'm just saying you should be careful," Tyler said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get defensive about it." There it was, the trap. If I continued arguing, I'd look irrational and oversensitive. If I backed down, Tyler's insinuations would stand unchallenged. It was a no-win situation, and he knew it. "Maybe we should all just wait and see what the mechanic actually finds," Mom said in her peacekeeper voice. No point arguing about hypotheticals. But I could see the damage was already done. Tyler's seed of doubt had been planted, and now my parents would view any expensive diagnosis from Ricardo with suspicion. If he found something seriously wrong with my car, something that required major repairs, they'd assume I was being scammed rather than helped. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner conversation in my head. There was something calculated about Tyler's responses, something too convenient about his sudden expertise in automotive fraud. For someone who'd never expressed concern about my choice of mechanics before, he seemed remarkably well informed about the dangers of independent repair shops. And then there was the timing. My car had been running perfectly for months, right up until this week. The problems had started suddenly, escalated quickly, and now seemed to be stumping an experienced mechanic. In my line of work at the animal clinic, we learned to pay attention to patterns, to symptoms that didn't quite fit the obvious explanations. I pulled out my phone and started researching car sabotage, feeling slightly ridiculous even as I typed the words into Google. But what I found made my blood run cold. Loosened brake lines, sugar in gas tanks, cut belts, and disabled alternators. Dozens of ways someone with basic mechanical knowledge could disable a vehicle while making it look like natural wear and tear. Someone like Tyler, who'd taken auto shop in high school. Someone who knew access to tools and knew exactly when I'd be at work, when my car would be sitting unattended in the clinic parking lot. Someone who'd been making increasingly pointed comments about my car's reliability, almost as if he were building a case for its inevitable failure. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started falling into place. Tyler's sudden interest in my transportation situation, his convenient absences when my car started having problems, the way he kept steering family conversations toward getting me a more reliable vehicle, preferably one that would require financial help from Dad, putting me back in the dependent little sister role. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Tyler might be jealous, competitive, even petty, but surely he wouldn't actually sabotage my car. That was crossing the line from sibling rivalry into something much darker and more serious. But when I walked outside to check the mail, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were small metal shavings scattered on the driveway where my car had been parked, glinting in the morning sunlight like confetti from some malicious celebration. The kind of shavings you might see if someone had been working with tools, cutting or filing metal in the darkness. Someone had been out here recently, working on something metal, something that required precision and secrecy. Something like sabotaging a car's engine components. I called Ricardo immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for him to answer. When he picked up, I could hear the sounds of the shop in the background. Air compressors and impact wrenches, the ordinary sounds of honest work being done. Ricardo, it's Harmony. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, mija. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath, knowing how crazy this was going to sound. When you look at my car, does anything seem intentional? Like, could someone have caused these problems on purpose? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Ricardo finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Why don't you come down to the shop this afternoon? There's something I want to show you. Ricardo's auto shop sat on the corner of Industrial Avenue and 3rd Street, wedged between a laundromat and a tire store that had seen better decades. The building itself looked like it had been constructed sometime in the 1960s, cinder block walls painted forest green with hand-painted signs advertising honest work, fair prices in both English and Spanish. But what struck me as I walked through the open bay doors wasn't the age of the building, it was the meticulous organization inside. Every tool had its place. Every workbench was clean despite obvious heavy use. The floor, while stained from years of oil changes and brake jobs, was swept and orderly. This wasn't some fly-by-night operation trying to squeeze money out of desperate customers. This was the workspace of someone who took pride in their craft. Ricardo Martinez emerged from under the hood of a blue sedan, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. He was shorter than I'd expected from our phone conversations, maybe 5'6", with graying hair and forearms that spoke of decades spent wrestling with stubborn bolts and seized engine parts. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Sharp, intelligent, and deeply concerned. He said, "Harmony,
Thank you for coming down. I wanted to show you something before we talked on the phone anymore. He led me to the back corner of the shop where my Honda sat on a hydraulic lift, its hood open like a patient on an operating table. Even from a distance, I could see that several components had been removed and laid out on a nearby workbench with the precision of a surgeon displaying evidence. I've been working on cars since I was 15 years old, Ricardo said, his voice carrying the weight of those 4 decades. Started helping my Uncle Miguel with his '72 Camaro. Learned everything from oil changes to complete engine rebuilds. In all that time, I've seen just about every way a car can break down naturally. He gestured toward my engine bay, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. Cables hung loose where they should have been connected. A belt lay coiled on the workbench like a dead snake. What looked like a small electronic component sat in pieces next to it. This isn't natural wear and tear, Ricardo continued, his voice steady but grim. Someone did this deliberately. My stomach dropped, even though part of me had been expecting exactly this confirmation. Hearing it out loud from an expert made it real in a way that my late-night internet research couldn't. Show me, I said. Ricardo picked up what looked like a thick black cable from the workbench. This is your main power cable, connects the battery to the alternator. See these cuts here? He pointed to what I initially thought were cracks. These aren't from age or wear. Someone used wire cutters, but they were smart about it. They didn't cut through all the way at once. He held the cable up to the fluorescent shop light, and I could see the pattern he was describing. Multiple small cuts, each one carefully placed to weaken the cable without completely severing it immediately. They wanted it to fail gradually, Ricardo explained. First, you'd notice minor electrical issues, maybe dim headlights, radio cutting out. Then the cuts would spread under normal stress until the cable failed completely. To most people, it would look like the cable just wore out. He set the cable down and picked up the serpentine belt. Same thing here. Someone took a razor blade and made shallow cuts on the underside of the belt, right where it would be hardest to spot during a casual inspection. The belt would hold for a while, maybe a few 100 miles, but eventually these cuts would cause it to snap. The methodical nature of it was what scared me most. This wasn't vandalism or random destruction. Someone had taken time to research exactly how to disable my car in a way that would look like mechanical failure. Someone who knew enough about automobiles to target the right components and patient enough to make it convincing. How long would someone need to do all this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
If they knew what they were doing, maybe 30, 40 minutes. They'd need basic hand tools, wire cutters, a small drill, maybe a socket wrench for the brake calipers. Nothing you couldn't fit in a standard toolbox. A standard toolbox like the one Tyler kept in his garage, like the one he'd been reorganizing just last weekend, complaining about Dad's cluttered workbench. Ricardo, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep this completely confidential. He nodded. Whatever you tell me stays between us. My brother, Tyler, he's been making comments about my car for months, saying it's unreliable, that I should get something newer. He works construction, knows his way around tools, and he's the only person who would have regular access to my car when it's parked at home. Ricardo's face remained neutral, but I caught something flickering in his eyes, not surprise, but confirmation of a suspicion he'd already formed. You think your brother did this? I don't want to think it, but the timing, the opportunity, the way he's been pushing me to get rid of this car. I trailed off, overwhelmed by the implications of what I was saying. Ricardo was quiet for a long moment, studying the components laid out on his workbench like evidence in a crime scene. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Harmony. What I'm about to tell you might be hard to hear, but I think you need to know. Whoever did this, they didn't just want to strand you or inconvenience you. These particular types of sabotage, done in this combination, they're dangerous. If your brakes had failed while you were driving down Miller's Hill, or if your power steering had given out while you were making a turn, he didn't need to finish the sentence.
I had driven Miller's Hill hundreds of times, a steep, winding road that connected downtown Riverside Heights to the residential areas where most families lived. Losing brakes or steering on that stretch of road wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it could be fatal. "Someone wanted to hurt you," Ricardo said quietly. "Maybe they didn't think it through completely, maybe they told themselves they were just trying to disable your car, but the end result could have been much worse than a breakdown." I felt tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, but from anger, so pure and white-hot that it surprised me. Tyler hadn't just been trying to prove a point about my car's reliability. He'd been willing to put my life at risk to win whatever sick competition was playing out in his head. "What do I do now?" I asked. Ricardo considered this for a moment. "First, I document everything. Take photos, write up a detailed report of what I found. This kind of evidence, it tells a story that's hard to argue with." He paused, looking directly at me. "But you should know, Harmony, that involving the police might complicate things with your family. Sabotage like this, especially when it endangers someone's safety, that's not just a prank or sibling rivalry. That's a serious crime." I thought about Tyler's smug confidence at dinner last night, the way he dismissed my concerns and painted me as paranoid. I thought about all the years of subtle undermining, all the dreams Tyler had convinced my family were unrealistic. "Document everything," I said. "I want proof that can't be argued with or explained away." Ricardo nodded and reached for his camera. "Then let's make sure we tell this story right." Ricardo spent the next hour meticulously photographing every piece of evidence from multiple angles, narrating each shot like a detective documenting a crime scene. The precision cuts on the power cable, the deliberate scoring on the serpentine belt, the tiny drilled hole in the power steering reservoir. Each photograph told part of a larger story that would be impossible to dismiss as coincidence or natural wear. "I'm going to write up a formal assessment," Ricardo said, downloading the photos to his computer. "In 30 years of running the shop, I've only seen intentional sabotage maybe 4 or 5 times. Usually it's angry ex-boyfriends or bitter divorce situations. But this is different. Whoever did this knows cars well enough to target exactly the right components for maximum impact." I watched him type up his findings, each technical detail another nail in Tyler's coffin of denial. But having proof and getting anyone to believe it were 2 entirely different challenges. My family had already demonstrated their willingness to dismiss my concerns and trust Tyler's version of events. "Ricardo, can I ask you something? How would you prove to skeptical people that this was intentional? People who might think I'm just trying to avoid paying for expensive repairs." He looked up from his computer screen, understanding immediately what I was really asking. "You mean your family?" I nodded, feeling heat creep up my neck. "They already think I'm being taken advantage of by choosing an independent mechanic over a dealership. If I come home claiming sabotage, they'll think you're either lying or being manipulated by me," he finished. "I get it. It's not the first time I've had to deal with people who assumed the worst about shops like mine." He pulled out a manila folder and started assembling copies of everything. Photos, his written assessment, even the damaged components themselves, sealed in labeled bags. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you copies of everything, but I'm also going to reach out to someone who can provide independent verification." "What do you mean?"
My nephew Carlos works for the county sheriff's department. He's not a detective, just a patrol officer, but he's seen enough car accidents to know what intentional damage looks like. If he takes a look at this evidence and confirms my assessment, it becomes a lot harder for people to claim I'm making it up for profit. The idea of involving law enforcement, even informally, made my stomach clench. Once we crossed that line, there would be no going back to pretending this was just a family misunderstanding. But Tyler had crossed a line first, when he decided my safety was less important than his ego. "Okay," I said, "let's do it." Carlos Martinez arrived at the shop 20 minutes later, still in uniform from his day shift. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of alert, observant demeanor that probably served him well in law enforcement. Ricardo briefed him on the situation without mentioning Tyler's name, presenting it as a potential criminal matter that needed professional evaluation. Carlos examined each piece of evidence with the methodical attention of someone trained to testify in court. He asked detailed questions about the types of tools required, the skill level needed, and the potential consequences if the sabotage had remained undetected. "This is an amateur hour," he said finally, photographing the evidence with his own camera. Whoever did this understood exactly what would happen when each component failed. The timing, the progression of problems. It's calculated. He looked directly at me. "Ma'am, I have to ask, do you have any idea who might have done this? Ex-boyfriend? Workplace conflict? Family dispute?" The question hung in the air like smoke. This was the moment where I either committed fully to exposing Tyler or backed down and let him get away with it. I thought about the metal shavings in the driveway, about Tyler's convenient absences, about years of subtle undermining disguised as brotherly concern. "I have a suspicion," I said carefully, "but I need to be absolutely certain before I make any accusations." Carlos nodded, understanding the delicate position I was in. "That's smart. False accusations can destroy relationships permanently. But you should also know that this level of sabotage, especially targeting brake and steering components, this is felony territory if we can prove intent to cause harm." Felony. The word hit me like a physical blow. Tyler hadn't just played a prank or tried to inconvenience me. He'd committed a serious crime, one that could have resulted in my death. The brother who used to help me with math homework had deliberately sabotaged safety systems in my car. "I'll file an informal report documenting the evidence," he said, "so there's an official record if you decide to pursue charges later. But take some time to think about how you want to handle this. Family situations like this, they tend to get messy fast once lawyers and court systems get involved." After Carlos left, Ricardo and I sat in his small office reviewing the documentation we'd assembled. The evidence was overwhelming, but I found myself thinking about strategy rather than emotions. How do you confront someone who spent years perfecting the art of manipulation? How do you expose a lie to people who've been conditioned to believe the liar? "I need to catch him in the act," I said suddenly. Ricardo looked up from organizing the evidence files. "What do you mean?" "Tyler's good at covering his tracks, at making everything look innocent, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's gotten away with this completely. If I give him another opportunity—" "Harmony, that's dangerous thinking. You're talking about using yourself as bait." "Not exactly, but maybe there's a way to create a situation where Tyler reveals what he knows, something that forces him to show his hand." I thought about Tyler's personality, his need to be the smartest person in the room, his compulsion to prove he was right about my poor choices. There had to be a way to leverage that arrogance against him. What if I told my family that Ricardo found evidence of sabotage, but I made it sound like he couldn't prove who did it? Tyler would probably volunteer information to help the investigation, maybe even suggest theories about who might be responsible. Ricardo shook his head. "Too risky. If your brother is willing to sabotage your car, what makes you think he won't escalate if he feels cornered?" "Because he's not a criminal mastermind. He's an insecure bully who's been getting away with psychological manipulation for years. He sabotaged my car because he thought it was a perfect crime. No witnesses, no evidence, just a convenient mechanical failure that would prove his point about my poor judgment." I stood up, pacing the small office as the plan formed in my mind. "But he doesn't know about you, Ricardo. He doesn't know that we've documented everything. As far as Tyler knows, his plan worked perfectly. My car broke down. My family thinks I'm being scammed by an untrustworthy mechanic, and I'm about to be forced into accepting his help with a new vehicle." "So what are you proposing?" "I'm going to go home and tell them exactly what you found. I'm going to present the evidence and watch Tyler's reaction. If he's innocent, he'll be shocked and concerned. But if he's guilty, he'll try to control the narrative, try to discredit the evidence, or suggest alternative explanations." "Exactly. And every time he opens his mouth, he'll reveal more about what he knows and how he knows it." Ricardo was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "You realize this could blow up your entire family." "Tyler blew up my family when he decided to risk my life over his ego. I'm just going to make sure everyone knows who lit the fuse." I gathered the evidence files, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. In a few hours, I'd be sitting at the same dinner table where Tyler had spent years undermining my dreams and making me question my own judgment. But this time, I wouldn't be the naive little sister asking for approval. This time, I'd be the one holding all the cards. "Ricardo," I said as I headed toward the door, "make sure you keep copies of everything in a safe place. Something tells me I'm going to need backup documentation before this is over." He nodded grimly. "Be careful, Harmony. Cornered animals tend to bite." I smiled, feeling a cold confidence I'd never experienced before. Good thing I've been working with animals for years. I know exactly what to do when something shows its teeth. I pulled into the driveway at exactly 6:15 p.m., timing my arrival to coincide with the family's pre-dinner routine. Tyler's truck was parked in its usual spot, freshly washed and gleaming under the late afternoon sun. The sight of it, so pristine, so perfect, made my jaw clench. In a few minutes, that truck was going to represent everything wrong with my brother's character. The manila envelope containing Ricardo's evidence sat on my passenger seat like a loaded weapon. Photographs, technical assessments, an informal police report, and the damaged components themselves sealed in labeled bags. Everything Tyler had done to my car, documented with professional precision and impossible to explain away. But I wasn't walking in there guns blazing. That would give Tyler time to construct a defense, to spin the evidence, to make me look like the unstable sister making wild accusations. Instead, I was going to let him hang himself with his own arrogance. Mom was in the kitchen preparing her famous pot roast, the smell of herbs and slow-cooked beef filling the house with the kind of comfort that made family betrayal feel even more devastating. She looked up as I entered, wiping her hands on a dish towel decorated with dancing vegetables. "How did things go at the mechanic? Was Tyler right about it being a simple fix?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to everyone about," I said, setting the envelope on the kitchen counter, but not opening it yet. "Ricardo found some things that are concerning." Dad emerged from the living room, still in his Henderson Construction Polish shirt, beer in hand. Tyler followed a few seconds later, phone in one hand, car keys jingling in the other. He looked relaxed, confident, like someone whose plan had gone off without a hitch. "Don't tell me," Tyler said with a knowing smirk, "the mysterious Ricardo found thousands of dollars worth of urgent repairs that need to be done immediately. What's it this time? Transmission? Engine rebuild? I bet he even offered to let you make payments." The dismissive tone, the pre-constructed narrative, the way he was already painting Ricardo as a scam artist was exactly what I'd expected. Tyler had spent days preparing for this conversation, building the framework that would make my family dismiss whatever the mechanic found. "Actually, he found evidence that someone sabotaged my car," I said, calmly, watching Tyler's face for any telltale reaction. The effect was immediate. Tyler's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second before reassembling itself. But in that moment, I saw something flash across his features. Not surprise, but calculation. He was already working out how to handle this unexpected development. "Sabotage," Dad said, setting down his beer. "That's a serious accusation, Harmony. What kind of evidence?" I opened the envelope and spread Ricardo's photographs across the kitchen table like a dealer revealing a winning hand. The cut power cables, the scored serpentine belt, and the drilled hole in the power steering reservoir. Each image was labeled with technical explanations in Ricardo's careful handwriting. Mom leaned over the photos, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand what I'm looking at," I explained, pointing to each photograph. "The cuts on this cable weren't from normal wear and tear. They were made with wire cutters. The damage to this belt was done with a razor blade, and this tiny hole in the power steering reservoir was drilled with a precision bit." Tyler moved closer to the table, studying the photographs with what looked like genuine interest, but I noticed he was holding his phone differently now, almost protectively, and his free hand had moved to his pocket where he kept his keys. "Well, that's crazy," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of concern mixed with skepticism.
But are we sure this Ricardo guy knows what he's talking about? I mean, how can he tell the difference between deliberate damage and normal wear and tear? There it was, the deflection I'd been waiting for. Instead of being shocked by evidence that someone had tried to harm his sister, Tyler's first instinct was to question the credibility of the person who'd discovered it. Ricardo has been working on cars for 30 years, and his assessment was confirmed by a sheriff's deputy who specializes in accident investigation. This time, Tyler's reaction was more pronounced. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw him swallow hard. The involvement of official police involvement clearly had not been part of his calculations. A deputy? Dad asked. Harmony, you called the police about this? I didn't call them. Ricardo's nephew works for the sheriff's department, and Ricardo asked him to take a look because the sabotage was so sophisticated. Deputy Martinez said he'd only seen damage like this a few times, usually in cases involving domestic violence or workplace retaliation. Tyler was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was smart enough to realize that official police involvement meant this couldn't be dismissed as easily as he'd hoped.
Look, Tyler said, setting his phone down on the counter with deliberate casualness. I know this is scary, Harmony. The idea that someone would deliberately try to hurt you, it's terrifying, but we need to think logically about this. The shift in his tone was masterful. Gone was the dismissive big brother questioning my judgment. Now he was the protective family member, concerned for my safety and emotional well-being. It was psychological manipulation at its finest, and I had to admit Tyler was good at it. What do you mean, think logically? Mom asked. Well, who would want to sabotage Harmony's car? And why? It's not like she has enemies or an ex-boyfriend with a grudge. And if someone really wanted to hurt her, wouldn't they choose something more direct? Tyler was building a case for the sabotage being either a mistake or a random act, carefully steering the conversation away from anyone with intimate knowledge of my schedule and access to my vehicle. But in doing so, he was revealing exactly how much thought he'd given to this scenario. Actually, I said, pulling out Ricardo's written assessment, Deputy Martinez said the sabotage showed intimate knowledge of my daily routine. The components that were damaged would cause failures gradually, over the course of several days, rather than immediate catastrophic breakdown. Someone who knew my work schedule, knew when my car would be parked and unattended, and knew enough about automotive systems to target exactly the right components. I watched Tyler process this information, saw him realize that the net was tightening around someone who fit that exact profile. But instead of showing concern or fear, he doubled down on the protective brother routine. That's even more terrifying, he said, reaching out to put a hand on my shoulder. Harmony, this means someone has been watching you, studying your habits. This isn't random vandalism. This is stalking behavior. The physical contact made my skin crawl, but I forced myself not to pull away. Tyler was trying to position himself as my protector while simultaneously deflecting suspicion from himself. It was a brilliant manipulation. Who would suspect the caring brother who was so concerned about his sister's safety? The deputy asked if I had any idea who might have done this, I said, looking directly at Tyler. Someone with access, opportunity, and motive. Someone who's been encouraging me to get rid of this car for months. For just a moment, Tyler's protective mask slipped. I saw a flash of something cold and calculating in his eyes, the look of someone who'd been caught but wasn't ready to admit defeat. Are you... He started, then stopped, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Harmony, are you seriously suggesting that someone in this family, that I would ever hurt Harmony? The wounded tone, the look of betrayed innocence. Tyler was good, really good. If I didn't have a folder full of evidence sitting on the table, I might have felt guilty for even considering the possibility. But I did have evidence, and I was about to use Tyler's own arrogance to seal his fate. I'm not suggesting anything, I said carefully. I'm just sharing what the experts found and what they recommended. Deputy Martinez said the next step would be to look at anyone who had regular access to my car and the technical knowledge to cause this specific type of damage. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a sword waiting to fall. He also said that whoever did this probably kept the tools they used nearby, maybe even in their own vehicle or workspace. Standard procedure in cases like this is to search the vehicles and work areas of anyone who had opportunity and means. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of Mom's pot roast and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Tyler stood frozen by the counter, his hand still resting on his phone, his face a mask of careful neutrality that I now recognized as his tell. When Tyler was genuinely surprised or upset, his emotions showed immediately. When he was calculating his next move, he went completely still. Dad broke the silence first, his voice heavy with the kind of authority he used at construction sites when problems needed immediate solutions. Tyler, do you have any idea who might have done this to your sister's car? It was a perfectly reasonable question, the kind any concerned father would ask. But I watched Tyler's reaction carefully, looking for the signs I'd learned to recognize over years of living with a master manipulator. Dad, I can't believe we're even having this conversation, Tyler said, his voice carrying a perfect note of wounded disbelief. The idea that someone in this family, that I, would ever hurt Harmony. He trailed off, shaking his head, as if the very suggestion was too painful to complete. But while his words expressed hurt, his body language told a different story. Tyler's shoulders had squared slightly, his stance shifting into what I recognized as his defensive posture. He was preparing for battle, not mourning the loss of family trust. Nobody's accusing you of anything, Mom said quickly, always the peacekeeper. We're just trying to understand who could have done such a terrible thing. Tyler seized on Mom's supportive tone like a lifeline. Thank you, Mom. I mean, think about it logically. Why would I sabotage Harmony's car? What would I possibly gain from that? It was a smart move, forcing the conversation into logical territory where Tyler excelled. He'd always been good at constructing reasonable-sounding arguments, at making his version of events seem like the only sensible possibility.
Well, I said carefully, Deputy Martinez mentioned that in cases like this, the motive is usually about control or proving a point. Maybe someone who'd been arguing that my car was unreliable wanted to be proven right. Tyler's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's a pretty twisted way of thinking, Harmony. You're suggesting someone would risk your safety just to win an argument about car reliability? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied. I'm repeating what a law enforcement professional told me about typical motives in automotive sabotage cases. Dad set his beer down harder than necessary, the bottle clinking against the granite countertop. This is getting out of hand. Tyler, where were you on the nights when this damage could have been done? Can you account for your whereabouts? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler's face went through a series of microexpressions: surprise, hurt, anger, and finally calculation. He was realizing that his position in the family wasn't as unassailable as he had assumed. I can't believe you're asking me for an alibi, Tyler said, his voice cracking slightly. Dad, this is your son you're talking to, the same son who's worked beside you for 3 years, who's never missed a family dinner, who's been nothing but supportive of Harmony even when she makes questionable decisions. The phrase questionable decisions was vintage Tyler, a subtle dig disguised as a statement of support. Even while defending himself, he couldn't resist undermining me. Like what questionable decisions? I asked, genuinely curious to see how he justified that comment. Tyler's eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment I saw the Brotherhood spent years conditioning me to doubt my own judgment. I didn't mean anything specific, just, choosing that particular mechanic over a dealership, driving a used car instead of something more reliable. Small things that add up. Small things that you've been commenting on for months, I pointed out, almost like you were building a case for why my car would eventually fail. Or like I was concerned about my sister's safety, Tyler shot back, his protective mask slipping back into place. Harmony, I've been worried about that car since the day you bought it. I've seen too many accidents on job sites, too many people hurt because they tried to save money on safety equipment. It was masterfully done. Tyler had taken his months of undermining comments and reframed them as expressions of brotherly concern. To anyone who didn't know the full context, it would sound perfectly reasonable. But Dad was looking at Tyler with new eyes now, the kind of analytical gaze he used when examining blueprints for structural flaws. Son, answer my question. Where were you on Tuesday and Wednesday nights this week? Tuesday and Wednesday, the nights that I'd worked late at the clinic when my car had been parked in the employee lot behind the building, the nights when someone could have accessed it without being seen by neighbors or family. Tyler's hesitation was brief but noticeable. Tuesday, I had drinks with some guys from the Millbrook crew. We went to Murphy's Tavern after work. Wednesday, I was home, working on some project estimates in the garage. Which guys from the crew? Dad pressed. And what time did you get home Tuesday? Jesus, Dad, I don't know exactly. Mike Henderson, Danny Reeves, maybe Tom Willis. We probably left around 9:30, 10 o'clock. I was home by 11 at the latest. The details were specific enough to sound truthful, but vague enough to avoid easy verification. It was exactly the kind of alibi someone would construct if they were being careful not to lie outright while still covering their tracks. Mom looked between Dad and Tyler, her maternal instincts clearly torn between protecting her son and seeking the truth. Tyler, honey, you understand why we have to ask these questions, right? Someone tried to hurt Harmony. We need to figure out who. Of course I understand, Tyler said, his tone softer now, more vulnerable. But Mom, it hurts that you'd even consider. I mean, what kind of person do you think I am? The shift to emotional manipulation was textbook Tyler. When logic and deflection weren't working, he'd appeal to family loyalty and make his accusers feel guilty for questioning him. I'd fallen for this routine countless times over the years. But this time, I had evidence. Tyler, I said, pulling out the bag containing the damaged power cable, Ricardo said whoever cut this cable knew exactly where to make the cuts for maximum effect with minimal visible damage. They also knew that this particular component failure would strand me but wouldn't cause immediate danger, unlike the brake and steering sabotage, which could have been fatal. I held up the cable so everyone could see the precise cuts Ricardo had documented. This suggests someone who wanted to prove their point about my car's reliability, but maybe didn't think through the full consequences of the other damage they caused. Tyler stared at the cable, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not guilt exactly, but a kind of resignation, as if he was realizing that his carefully constructed defenses weren't going to hold. "What are you trying to say, Harmony?" he asked quietly. "I'm saying that Deputy Martinez is going to want to examine the tools of anyone who had access to my car. Wire cutters, small drill bits, razor blades. He said perpetrators usually keep the tools they used, often in their vehicles or personal workspaces." Tyler's eyes flicked toward the garage where his toolbox sat alongside Dad's equipment. It was an involuntary movement, barely perceptible, but it told me everything I needed to know. "And," I continued, watching Tyler's face carefully, "he said that in cases involving automotive sabotage between family members, there's usually a pattern of escalating control behaviors, comments about the victim's poor choices, undermining their confidence, creating situations where the victim becomes dependent on the perpetrator's help." The description hit Tyler like a physical blow. His face went pale, and I saw him swallow hard. For the first time since I'd started presenting evidence, Tyler looked genuinely frightened. "Those are some pretty serious accusations to be throwing around," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Are you really ready to destroy this family over some conspiracy theory cooked up by a mechanic who's probably just trying to avoid a lawsuit?" There it was, Tyler's final defensive strategy. When cornered, he'd try to make me the villain, the unstable sister whose wild accusations were tearing apart a loving family. It was his last, best hope of turning the narrative back in his favor. But I'd been preparing for this moment since I left Ricardo's shop. "I'm not destroying anything, Tyler," I said calmly. "I'm just sharing what professionals found and what they recommended. If you're innocent, then a search of your tools will clear your name completely." I paused, letting the challenge hang in the air.
unless there's a reason you wouldn't want Deputy Martinez examining your toolbox. Tyler's face went through a spectrum of emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Defiance, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief, as if part of him was tired of carrying the weight of what he'd done and was ready for it to be over. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. "You want to search my tools? Go ahead. Search everything. My truck, my toolbox, my room. When you don't find anything, maybe then you'll realize how crazy this whole theory sounds." But even as he issued the challenge, I noticed Tyler's hands trembling slightly. He shoved them into his pockets, probably hoping no one else would see the telltale sign of his nervousness. Dad was already moving toward the garage, his construction worker's instincts taking over. "Come on then, let's get this settled once and for all." The garage had always been Dad's domain, an organized chaos of power tools, lumber scraps, and automotive equipment that somehow made perfect sense to him. Tyler's toolbox sat on the far workbench, a red Craftsman rolling chest that had been his high school graduation gift. Next to it, his personal tool bag that he carried to job sites. Mom lingered in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this evening had taken. "Maybe we should wait for the deputy to do this officially, if there's legal evidence involved." "No," he said quickly, then caught himself. I have nothing to hide. If searching my tools will put this to rest, let's do it now." Dad was moving toward the garage, his construction worker's instincts taking over. "Come on then, let's get this settled once and for all." The garage had always been Dad's domain, an organized chaos of power tools, lumber scraps, and automotive equipment that somehow made perfect sense to him. Tyler's toolbox sat on the far workbench, a red Craftsman rolling chest that had been his high school graduation gift. Next to it, his personal tool bag that he carried to job sites. Mom lingered in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this evening had taken. "Maybe we should wait for the deputy to do this officially, if there's legal evidence involved." "No," he said quickly, then caught himself. I have nothing to hide. If searching my tools will put this to rest, let's do it now." Dad pulled the rolling toolbox away from the wall and began opening drawers. The top drawer contained the usual assortment: screwdrivers, Allen wrenches, measuring tape. Standard construction tools, everything clean and organized exactly the way Tyler kept all his possessions. The second drawer revealed pliers, wire strippers, and electrical testing equipment. Dad lifted out a pair of diagonal wire cutters, examining them under the fluorescent garage lighting. "These look clean," he said, but his voice carried uncertainty now. "Of course they're clean. I maintain my tools properly, unlike some people who let their cars fall apart and then blame everyone else when they break down." The jab at me was reflexive, Tyler falling back on his default pattern of deflection through attack. But it rang hollow now, desperate rather than confident. Dad continued through the drawers methodically. Socket sets, combination wrenches, a small set of precision screwdrivers. Everything exactly where it should be, nothing that obviously connected to the sabotage of my car. I was beginning to wonder if Tyler had been smart enough to dispose of the evidence when Dad reached the bottom drawer. His hand stopped midway through lifting out a cordless drill, and his expression changed. "Tyler," Dad said slowly, "why do you have a set of micro drill bits?" The garage went silent except for the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Tyler's face had gone pale again, but he rallied quickly. "They're for precision work. Sometimes we need to drill pilot holes for small screws," or he trailed off, realizing that his explanation was only making things worse. Dad held up a small plastic case containing drill bits that were almost impossibly tiny. The kind used for precision work on electronics are small mechanical components. The kind that would drill a hole exactly the size of the one Ricardo had found in my power steering reservoir. "When did you buy these?" Dad asked. Tyler's hesitation was answer enough, but he tried anyway. "I don't remember exactly. Last month, maybe 2 months ago, we had a project that required some detailed work. What project? Dad pressed. I've been on every job with you for the past 3 months. We haven't done anything that would require bits this small. The lie was crumbling, and Tyler knew it. His carefully constructed alibis and explanations were falling apart under his father's methodical questioning. Dad might not be a detective, but he knew tools, he knew construction work, and he knew his son. Look, Tyler said, his voice rising slightly, just because I have the right tools doesn't mean I use them to sabotage Harmony's car. Lots of people have wire cutters and drill bits. Show me the drill, I said quietly. Tyler's eyes snapped to mine. What? The cordless drill. Show me the chuck. Dad handed me the drill, and I examined the chuck where the drill bits attached. Even in the fluorescent lighting, I could see tiny metal fillings caught in the threads, fresh ones that glinted like silver dust. These are fresh metal shavings, I said, holding the drill where everyone could see. Recent drilling in metal, not wood or drywall. Mom stepped closer, her face pale with dawning realization. Tyler, honey, please tell me you wouldn't hurt your sister.
The maternal plea broke something in Tyler's composure. His defensive mask slipped completely, revealing the scared, angry young man underneath. I wasn't trying to hurt her, he exploded. I was trying to prove a point. That car was a piece of junk, and she was being stubborn about it. All I wanted was for it to break down so she'd finally listen to reason and get something safer. The confession hung in the garage like a toxic cloud. Tyler had said it, admitted to sabotaging my car, but he was still trying to frame it as concern for my safety. You cut my brake lines, I said, my voice deadly calm. You loosened my brake calipers. You drained my power steering fluid. Any one of those could have killed me. I researched it, Tyler protested. I made sure the problems would happen gradually when you were driving slowly in town, not on the highway. I calculated the timing so you'd notice the issues before they became dangerous. Dad stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Tyler, do you hear yourself? You're talking about sabotaging your sister's car like it was some kind of engineering project. Because that's all it was supposed to be. A controlled demonstration of why that car was unsafe. She was going to get hurt eventually anyway, driving that piece of junk. I sped up the timeline. The twisted logic was vintage Tyler, taking a criminal act and reframing it as a favor he was doing for me. Even caught red-handed with evidence, he couldn't admit that he'd done something wrong. In his mind, he was still the protective big brother making the hard decisions for his naive little sister. Tyler, Mom said, tears streaming down her face, you could have killed her. What if the brakes had failed while she was driving down Miller's Hill? What if she'd lost control and hit another car, hurt other people? For the first time, Tyler seemed to consider the full implications of what he had done. His face went ashen as he realized that his controlled demonstration could have resulted in multiple deaths. I didn't think. I calculated everything. I made sure... He stopped, seeming to understand how hollow his justification sounded. Dad set the drill down on the workbench with deliberate care, his movements controlled, but his anger evident in every line of his body. Tyler, do you hear yourself? You're talking about sabotaging your sister's car like it was some kind of engineering project. Because that's all it was supposed to be, a controlled demonstration of why that car was unsafe. She was going to get hurt eventually anyway, driving that piece of junk. I sped up the timeline. The twisted logic was vintage Tyler, taking a criminal act and reframing it as a favor he was doing for me. Even caught red-handed with evidence, he couldn't admit that he'd done something wrong. In his mind, he was still the protective big brother making the hard decisions for his naive little sister. Tyler, Mom said, tears streaming down her face, you could have killed her. What if the brakes had failed while she was driving down Miller's Hill? What if she'd lost control and hit another car, hurt other people? For the first time, Tyler seemed to consider the full implications of what he had done.
His face went ashen as he realized that his controlled demonstration could have resulted in multiple deaths. I didn't think. I calculated everything. I made sure. He stopped, seeming to understand how hollow his justification sounded. Dad set the drill down on the workbench with deliberate care, his movements controlled, but his anger evident in every line of his body. Tyler, you're going to call Deputy Martinez right now. You're going to confess to what you did, and you're going to face the consequences. Dad, please, Tyler pleaded. I know I screwed up, but involving the police, this is family business. We can handle this internally. Family business? Dad's voice rose to a volume I'd rarely heard from him. Son, you committed felony sabotage. You endangered your sister's life and potentially the lives of innocent strangers. This stopped being family business the moment you picked up those wire cutters. Tyler looked around the garage desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might support his version of events. But Mom was crying, Dad was furious, and I was standing there with evidence that proved everything I'd accused him of. Harmony, Tyler said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. You don't have to press charges. I'll pay for all the repairs. I'll replace your car with something better. Just please don't destroy my life over this. The irony was staggering. Tyler was asking for mercy from the sisters whose life he put in danger, requesting family loyalty from the person he'd betrayed most completely. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided my safety was less important than your ego. I'm calling Deputy Martinez. You can decide whether you want to confess voluntarily or wait for him to arrest you based on the evidence. I pulled out my phone and Tyler made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Wait, he said, just wait. If I confess, if I take responsibility for this, can we keep it quiet, handle it through the family instead of making it public? Tyler, I said, finger hovering over Deputy Martinez's number. You lost the right to negotiate the terms the moment you sabotaged my car. Now, the only question is whether you're going to cooperate or make this even worse for yourself. Deputy Martinez arrived 45 minutes later, his patrol car's red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across our driveway for the second time that week. But this time, the neighbors who peered through their curtains weren't witnessing a victim being helped. They were watching a criminal being held accountable. Tyler had spent those 45 minutes in the living room, slumped in Dad's recliner like a deflated balloon. He'd stopped trying to justify his actions, stopped negotiating for leniency, stopped being the manipulative golden child who'd controlled our family dynamics for years. In his place sat a 26-year-old man who'd finally been forced to confront the consequences of his choices. Mom alternated between silent tears and attempts to call their pastor, their lawyer, anyone who might help her understand how her son had become someone capable of endangering his sister's life over wounded pride. Dad paced the kitchen, occasionally stopping to stare at the evidence still spread across the table, as if he couldn't quite believe what his own eyes had shown him. I sat at the kitchen counter, feeling strangely calm for someone whose entire family structure was imploding. Maybe it was relief, the relief of finally being heard, of having my reality validated by undeniable proof. Or maybe it was the satisfaction of watching Tyler's carefully constructed persona crumble under the weight of truth. Deputy Martinez listened to Tyler's confession with the professional detachment of someone who'd heard similar stories before. He took notes, photographed the evidence, and collected the tools that had been used to sabotage my car. When Tyler finished speaking, the deputy looked up from his notepad. Mr. Henderson, I need to inform you that vehicular sabotage resulting in potential bodily harm is a Class C felony in this state. Given the sophisticated nature of the sabotage and the potential for fatal consequences, the district attorney will likely pursue the maximum penalty. The words hit Tyler like physical blows. Maximum penalty? But I cooperated. I confessed voluntarily. Cooperation will be noted in my report, Deputy Martinez replied evenly, but that doesn't change the severity of what you did. You deliberately compromised multiple safety systems in a motor vehicle.
If your sister had been seriously injured or killed, or if she'd lost control and harmed others, we'd be looking at much more serious charges." Tyler's face went gray as the full weight of his situation settled over him. This wasn't going to be handled quietly within the family. There would be formal charges, court appearances, public records. His name would be in the newspaper, his mugshot online. The golden boy image he'd cultivated so carefully was about to be destroyed completely. "What happens now?" Dad asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Mr. Henderson will need to come with me for formal booking and processing. He'll be arraigned within 48 hours. Given the nature of the charges and his cooperation, he'll likely be released on bail pending trial." Tyler looked around the room desperately, as if searching for one last escape route. His eyes settled on me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the brother who used to help me with homework and stand up to bullies on my behalf. "Harmony," he said quietly, "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but when this goes to court, will you tell them I never meant for you to get hurt?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Tyler was asking me to provide character testimony for the trial, to help minimize his sentence by emphasizing his intent rather than his actions. Even now, facing arrest and prosecution, he was still trying to manage the narrative. "Tyler," I said, "you may not have intended for me to get hurt, but you were willing to risk it to prove your point. That's not love. That's control." The words seemed to deflate him completely. Tyler nodded once, then stood and walked toward Deputy Martinez without another word. As they left, I heard Tyler ask quietly, "Will this affect my job at Henderson Construction?" The question was so Tyler. Even in the face of criminal charges, he was worried about his career prospects. Deputy Martinez didn't answer, but Dad and I both knew the reality. Henderson Construction couldn't keep an employee facing felony charges, especially not one whose crime involved deliberate sabotage. Tyler's carefully planned future was disintegrating along with everything else. The house felt different after they left. Quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like a battlefield after the fighting has ended, when you're left to count the casualties and assess the damage. Mom sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photographs of my sabotaged car. She keeps thinking I should have seen the signs. All those comments about your car, the way he pushed you to get something newer. How did I miss that it was manipulation? Because Tyler's been practicing manipulation his entire life. He's good at it. He knows exactly how to make his control look like concern, his jealousy look like protection. Dad joined us at the table, looking older than he had that morning. "I enabled him," he said simply. "All those years of praising his leadership skills and dismissing your achievements, I taught him that his opinion mattered more than yours." The admission was painful but necessary. Our family dynamics hadn't created Tyler's willingness to commit a felony, but they'd certainly created an environment where he felt entitled to control my choices and dismiss my autonomy. Over the following weeks, the legal process unfolded with mechanical precision. Tyler was formally charged with automotive sabotage and reckless endangerment. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that Tyler's cooperation and lack of prior criminal history warranted leniency. But the district attorney, perhaps influenced by the sophisticated nature of the sabotage and the potential for fatal consequences, refused to reduce the charges. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a brief article about a Riverside Heights man charged with sabotaging his sister's vehicle. Tyler's name and mugshot appeared online, searchable by anyone who might Google him in the future. His reputation, which he'd spent years building, was destroyed in a matter of days. Henderson Construction terminated his employment immediately. Dad tried to argue for a leave of absence rather than termination, but the company couldn't risk the liability of keeping someone facing felony charges on their payroll. Tyler's carefully planned future was disintegrating along with everything else.
Tyler received 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. He was also ordered to pay full restitution for the damage to my car and the costs of Ricardo's investigation. The judge specifically noted that while Tyler claimed his actions were motivated by concern for his sister's safety, his willingness to compromise multiple safety systems demonstrated reckless disregard for human life. After Tyler was led away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a deep sadness for the brother he could have been if he'd chosen to support my dreams instead of sabotaging them. Dr. Patterson helped me apply for emergency financial aid to cover the costs Tyler's sabotage had created. The Veterinary School Scholarship Committee, when they learned about the situation, actually used my experience as evidence of my resilience and determination. What Tyler had intended as a setback became proof of my ability to overcome obstacles and pursue my goals despite adversity. Ricardo repaired my car completely, refusing to accept payment beyond what insurance covered. "Someone who stands up to family like that," he said, "that's someone who deserves support, not more bills." 6 months later, I received my acceptance letter to the state veterinary college. As I held the letter in my hands, I thought about Tyler sitting in his prison cell, probably still convinced that he'd been trying to help me by sabotaging my car. The irony was perfect. His attempt to derail my dreams had actually strengthened my resolve and provided me with a powerful personal statement for my applications. I never visited Tyler in prison. Mom and Dad went occasionally, but I chose to focus on my future rather than relitigating my past. Sometimes healing means choosing not to forgive, not because you want to hold on to anger, but because you refuse to minimize what someone did to you in the name of family peace. Tyler was released after serving 14 months, with time off for good behavior. He moved to another state, found work with a construction company that didn't Google their employees' criminal histories, and slowly began rebuilding a life that looked nothing like the one he'd planned. I graduated veterinary school with honors and opened my own practice specializing in emergency surgery. The skills I'd learned from years of dealing with Tyler's manipulation, reading body language, recognizing deception, maintaining calm under pressure, served me well in my new profession. The practice is successful, my staff respects me, and my clients trust me to care for their animals during the most frightening moments of their pets' lives. It's exactly the life I'd dreamed of, the one Tyler had tried so hard to convince me I wasn't capable of achieving. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret pressing charges against my brother, if I wish our family had handled things differently. My answer is always the same. Tyler made his choice when he picked up those wire cutters. I just made sure he faced the consequences. Family loyalty should never come at the cost of personal safety or truth. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive behavior, even when that person is your own blood. Especially when that person is your own blood. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.